There are so many individuals that have experienced abusive or toxic relationships in their lives. And there are so many right now that are still experiencing that and don't know how to get out of it. And today I'm really pleased to have Shannon Ezzo on the show with us today. She's written a book called Battered Blessings, in which she describes her personal experiences of a highly abusive relationship and how ultimately she was able to get out of that. And then she'll share with us some thoughts on the importance of understanding when we are in an abusive relationship, or how can we pick up the red flags before we even get into a relationship or a toxic relationship that could be potentially abusive. So I hope that you'll join us. I think you'll find it fascinating.
At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Shannon, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Hey, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it. So this book, Battered Blessings, that has got to be a very powerful message that you want to share with people. And tell me a little bit about the book. Why did you write the book, and what's the background behind this?
Well, I wrote the book because I wanted to share my story, and I wanted to use it to kind of catapult, deeper discussions, bigger discussions, and a little bit more attention to some of the things that people don't talk about as it pertains to domestic violence, ignoring red flags and signs, how you get groomed to staying and being in a relationship like this, to kind of answer the question, why would someone stay? It's not a basic dry answer. It's a lot of effort that these abusers put into you, and they
let's talk about your story. Let's talk about your story.
Well, my story is, the book is a 3-year timeline, basically, of me meeting my abuser, getting involved with him, moving in with him, how it got abusive, the things that he put me through physically, emotionally, sexually, and then how I came out of that and how beautiful my life became once I finally got strong enough to correct some things that I also had to correct in myself.
So let's start with the story. How did you get into this relationship? And tell us, if you're willing to, and be transparent, because obviously you've written the book. So tell the audience a little bit about your story, and be free to go into detail a bit.
Well, he pursued me quite heavily, actually, online. He knew a friend of mine. And at the time, she was under the impression, we both were, that he was married. So I really didn't want to pay too much attention to him at all. So he actually stalked me on Facebook and showed up where we were at, my friend and I, one day. It was actually Cinco de Mayo, so it was an easy day to remember. He walked into the bar we were at and sat down, and just like he had been invited there. So he was he didn't take no for an answer right out of the bat, which was interesting to me. And at that time, it wasn't a red flag. It was more like, oh, wow, he must be really into me for him to just show up after I've blown him off for so long. And the more I got to know him and the stories that he told me about his past, and, just the horrible upbringing that he had, the horrible family experiences that he had being in group homes and being abused himself. He had a really tragic background, and it just kind of gave me a very motherly feeling towards him. Like I had this strange codependency developing that I didn't realize. And I just really wanted to show him his first, genuine love experience. So that's really how we got started.
And then what happened? I mean, you got into and quite frankly, I think that's the experience for many, that you meet someone and you don't look at the red flags. They come up and you think, okay, you know what? That's okay, because I'm here to help, type of thing.
And you think you're strong enough. You really do. You tell yourself that you're strong enough because he's the one that needs you. He had a traumatic upbringing. You see them as kind of a battered animal or a wounded boy. well, I did anyway, in my
Yeah.
experience.
Well,
So
and you assume that it's going to go away. That's what I'm finding as I've talked to different people is they see maybe these red flags. They're going to go, okay, you know what? That's not going to last. It's okay. We'll work through that.
yeah, you see him as little temper tantrums almost. And you're just like, well, I'll just let him have his moment or love him through this because he's broken and he needs to heal and he has all these issues. So you kind of you put yourself on the back burner when you think of somebody as needing help. You just really, you don't put yourself first. So it's easy to ignore or brush off a lot of the behaviors that are building up to what's going to come.
Yeah. So what happened? What happened chronologically in that relationship to where it got to the point that it did? Yeah, let's talk about that for a bit.
Well, when he first moved in with me, it would start with, weird arguments over stupid things. He was very insecure and very jealous. So even though he was a member of a 1% bike club, and when he would have the guys over or we would be out, if I did anything that he felt like was disrespectful or embarrassing to him, he would just fly into these tantrums, these horrible rages. And I saw them so childish. I didn't think that it was violent, even though he was like punching holes in walls and breaking my stuff left and right. It was like a hissy fit. I don't know how else to describe it because I didn't feel like I was in danger. It was almost laughable how ridiculous he was behaving about certain things. And it was like, if you're going to be this jealous and ridiculous, why are you even bringing these guys over to the house? You know what I mean? So that's how it kind of started. And he told me that he was uncomfortable because he moved into my apartment. So he convinced me to, pay the extra to get out of my lease and get into a house together with him, because then he would feel more stable. He never got, to feel stable.
Right.
So the day we moved into that house was the first day he put his hands on me. And I was shocked. I said something sassy in front of him because I'm sassy. And in front of the cable guy that was there to hook up the cable. And he backed me into one of the bedrooms and slammed me up against the wall by my neck and got real close to me and warned me verbally not to ever disrespect him again. And just kind of pushed off me and went back out there like nothing was happening and everything was normal. And I was like, okay, where did that just come from? But it didn't really hurt me. I didn't have any injuries. So again, I excused it as one of his his temper tantrums. The first night that he actually started beating me, I fought back just as hard. Like, if you're going to punch me in the face, I'm going to punch you in the face. So it once it set in that he just really put his hands on me that first time that we really got into it, I fought him like a man. I was furious. How dare you make me uproot my life and change everything, exclude everybody that I love for you, and then you're going to treat me like this? I don't think so.
How long before you actually you mentioned you moved into the house and that was the first experience?
Mm-hmm.
When was the next experience
that he put his hands on me? Was not even 2 months into living in the house. In between that time, he had a cousin that was here staying with us, and she actually helped us move into the house. And he put his hands on her in front of me, in front of all of us at the bar. And I was just shocked. I was shocked at how quick he was to do that, first of all, and how everybody just allowed it to happen and kind of brushed it under the rug, and nothing was really done about it. He had so many hush hush people around him that enabled him to behave this way. That was my first real taste of, wow, he really just thinks he can do whatever he wants and treat women however he wants to. But I was already in a house with him, so what was I supposed to do?
And then you got into the fist fight with him.
Yep, the first one.
And then it just continued from there?
It was like, no, and that's the thing. It's not an everyday occurrence. So you have these really horrible experiences where, the physical stuff is going on or the sexual stuff is going on, but then like you convince yourself that it's your fault, right? So immediately that night after we beat the crap out of each other, I'm laying in bed and I'm like, if you hadn't have said this, if you hadn't have done this, it wouldn't have escalated to him wanting to put his hands on me. these are triggers of his, he has a temper. Like, these are the things I was saying to myself in bed. And I ended up going out there and crying and apologizing and taking full blame and full responsibility for it, because that's how I just felt like everything was my fault. So you kind of do get that mindset, even if you do go through these patches where you are fighting, somehow you really believe yourself when you're telling yourself that it could have been avoided had you acted differently, kept your mouth shut, behaved how he wanted you to. And unfortunately, with somebody like that, it's not true, because eventually it's going to happen. If it's in them, it's in them.
So I'm curious. You talk about you took responsibility for the situation, and why do you think you took responsibility? What was going on emotionally for you, consciously, subconsciously, where you felt like, all right, it's my fault, and therefore I need to apologize, even though perhaps someone else on the outside looking in would have looked at that completely opposite?
Yeah. Well, like I said, he was broken and he had a lot of issues. So in my head at the time, had I not behaved a certain way, knowing how embarrassed he would get, knowing how defensive he was, and knowing how only his image mattered, because we were at the night that it happened, we were out at a nightclub with a bunch of biker friends of his, and I got mouthy, and I was wearing my property rags at the time because I had just become his property of the club, and that was a no-no. And he didn't react to that very well. So those are the kind of, and they kind of train you when you're in a club setting to be a little more docile, to follow orders, take direction, and just kind of, tidy up, cook the food, and be cute in the background until we need you. So there was that kind of training that I had to experience, and then his training that I was going through. And I think those two combined really put me in a very guilty mindset when it came to triggering his reaction to me, because my parents didn't raise me that way. And I still had a mouth on me. I still had backbone, and I still had a lot to say. So I wasn't going to be disrespected either. And that kind of really got in the way of what it was he was trying to make me become. So I would stand up to him and we would have our big fights. And then immediately after, I'm like blaming myself, because I felt like I was the stronger person. I was the more responsible person. And I shouldn't have done that to him, because I knew what the outcome would be.
And you had, as you said, you had the sense of, and people use this word codependency, and it's such a generalized word, it's a tough one to use. But I liked how you said you kind of had the sense of wanting to take care of him, kind of being his mother type of situation. And is that kind of what kept you in that relationship?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Because when you care about somebody like that in a motherly way or in a parental way, I don't know if you have kids, but you think of that childlike person before yourself. You think of their needs before your own, because they can't take care of themselves. They can't do for themselves. They wouldn't be able to sustain without you. They have abandonment issues. That's why they're acting this way. They have jealousy issues. That's why they're acting this way. You excuse the behavior, try to ride out the tantrums, and see what we can make happen, 10 minutes from now when he's over it.
Well, and you talk about all of the challenges that he had growing up, but what were the challenges that you ended up having because of the experience you had?
I developed PTSD, anxiety, and depression, obviously, from the years that I experienced with him. But I just recently actually found out that I have been walking around for 5 years with whiplash that has gone untreated. So I actually have 6 bone spurs in my neck, because he drugged me down the stairs by my hair at one point, and a flattening disc in the lower part of my spine because of the same trauma injury. So long lasting effects physically, and then night terrors, waking up screaming and fighting my husband just because he's trying to wake me out of a dream, stuff like that you don't think about when you're in it. You don't think about how much it's affecting you when you're in it. You're really just trying to survive each day and walk on eggshells and see which way it's going to go.
Okay, so you ultimately got married.
I did, not to him.
Oh,
But
okay. All
yeah,
right.
no, I actually, we got pregnant, and that's about the time I had two black eyes when I was pregnant. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after he dragged me down the stairs by my hair and my underwear. And yeah, that was kind of a turning point for me. That was a wake up call. So when we did the gender reveal party and I found out it was a girl, it just was really heartbreaking for me because I didn't want him around a daughter, and I couldn't trust him to be with her. I think that gender reveal is really when it set in for me that I had to get out. And 2 weeks later, he threw a lamp at me and I caught it to my head while I was pregnant. And that was all I needed. That was the cherry on the cake. So I left that night.
And I know that you've had some good feedback from your book already from people. What have you found for most women? And you mentioned that you get feedback from both men and women. So, I would guess that there are a number that experience to the degree that you do. There are some that experience it maybe at a lesser degree, not to make it any less devastating, but
Sure.
you get responses from women, you get responses from men. What is it that finally helps them to get out of these relationships? For you, it was a lamp in the head.
Yeah. For me, yeah, I mean, really the pregnancy was it for
Yeah.
me. But that was just my excuse to leave, because that was just the finalization that I needed, that he really wasn't changing for the baby. Um, for me, most of the people that reach out to me are people that have already gone through it. So they kind of connect with me in that way. Or it's people like men, for instance. The men that have reached out to me are men that recognize some of their self in reading about his character. And it's been a really positive response from the men. Actually, they thank me for pointing out some certain things that they could probably work on themselves to be better husbands to their wives, or what have you. So that's been nice. But generally speaking, I have gotten one phone call of a person that was trying to leave a relationship and was trying to do it safely, and what should they do right now. But most of the people that have reached out is people that have already been through it and come out the other side.
Well, and you talk about leaving a relationship safely. Let's
Mhm.
talk about that because you have a story there, don't you?
Yeah. Well, I had safe words. I had like one person that knew what was going on, and it was actually happening to her as well, which I didn't realize at the time until later on. But we had safe words, and she actually did initiate her safe word one time. I did have to, well, she um had to told me to send the police over to her house and everything. And I ended up going over there at one time and helping her and her kids get out, and got to a hotel and everything. I felt so horrible for her. And then she ended up with him the next day. So it's really hard to it's hard to get yourself involved in a situation like this, which is why safety is so important, because you don't want to escalate it. And I think that had I kept being involved in that situation, it would have just escalated for her, because now somebody knew their dirty, yucky secret, and
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't going to have that. So he became dangerous to me after I tried to step in. So there's a lot of safety aspects. It's not just about the person being abused. You also don't want it to escalate to where you have a really protective family or friend that goes after the abuser, and then that ends up in something tragic. There's so many dynamics to worry about, which is why it's terrifying. It's no easy task to get out of these relationships.
So, did you experience some very serious fear about getting out of your relationship?
Of course, which is why when I left, I actually found a place to go that he didn't know and didn't know of, because at that time, about the time that I left, is when I found out about his cousin, who was ironically the one helping me get out and, encouraging me to get out and working for him at the same time. And I didn't realize he was playing both sides, but he ended up being the abuser to the girl that I just told you about. And I was floored, because he was such a nice guy to me, and he was so helpful to me and there for me in ways that she didn't even know about. So when I found out that this was happening to her on such a more disgusting level, I I was terrified to know that this person had totally convinced me that he was a good guy, and I was buying everything that he was giving me, hook, line, and sinker, because he was the one protecting me and like trying to get me out safely and giving me information about when I could come and go get my stuff and leave. And then to find out that he was doing all that was just absolutely, it was repulsive to me. So shortly after that, unfortunately, he did, I think out of spite, he found out where I was and gave that information to my abuser. So then, you know, my address got posted on social media platforms, and he tried to get people to come over and like beat up the guy that was keeping me, who is now my husband. And, you know, try to get people to beat me up when I was pregnant. Like, he really lashed out. So luckily it was all talk on his end. It was talk, it was harassment, you know, sitting outside my house. My neighbor spotted him outside of my house a couple times. Just stuff like that, just kind of letting the presence be known, but never actually physically doing anything to me at that point.
Well, you talk about a bit about the fact that 75% of homicides within that situation occur after the woman leaves. So you never really feared for your life from him.
I don't think I ever feared for my life from him because I was pregnant at that time. And I knew how bad he did want the baby, or so I had convinced myself. So I knew how bad he wanted that. And I knew he wouldn't do anything to hurt that. So I think that the being pregnant when I left really kind of was my scapegoat, or made me at least feel like it was. But, you know, it was one of those time periods where you still look over your shoulder. Stupid things like a Harley Davidson driving down the road would trigger me into a panic attack, and I would have a complete breakdown just hearing a bike, when I love motorcycles. But that aspect of my life had now been tarnished because of what I'd gone through with him and the threats being made. Luckily, the club never got involved in any of it. And so that threat was taken off the table pretty quickly. But it, like I said, it was just all talk. It was just like a gorilla pounding on his chest and making a fuss that never really went anywhere. But it still stressed me the hell out because I was pregnant and worried and, you know, scared for myself, scared for her, scared about who to trust. It was terrifying.
Yeah. Well, and you've written the book, you're trying to share this experience with other people. Red flags. Now, you've noticed that one red flag, but I'm sure there's a number that you've personally experienced and you've heard from other people. So I'd appreciate you sharing with the audience, what are the red flags that can tell you or someone else that they're an abuser, or they're going to be groomed for abuse?
Or that it could escalate to that. There's so many. So extreme jealousy was one for me. I mean, jealous about everything. Even my friends that were female or being close to a family member, it would cause fights. It was just, like out of nowhere, for no reason, just the most jealous, stupid stuff. But then he would be liking all the girls' Facebook posts and sending, you know, nudes back and forth and doing whatever he wanted to do. So there was a huge difference in behavior about what was acceptable for me to do and him to do. Obviously the tantrums, if they're escalating to punching holes in walls and breaking stuff all the time, kicking TVs, harming pets. He had punched my puppy one time and I flipped out because the puppy chewed up his glasses, but it's a puppy and you left your glasses on the floor. So of course it's going to chew, but don't beat the crap out of my puppy, you know, stuff like that. For me, he had a drug habit. So that was always something that I had to tiptoe around after I found out about it was, you know, the come down day. It wasn't so much when he was high. He was actually quite charming when he was high, or vulnerable, but it was the day after that. It was everybody just be quiet. Don't wake the baby, like walk on eggshells. Extreme control. I wasn't able to wear certain things or hang out with certain people without a chaperone. Even like my best girlfriend, I wasn't able to hang out with her without a chaperone for some reason. Just controlling everything, like from what kind of groceries I could bring into the house and what kind of shows I could watch with or without him. Literally every aspect he wanted to have control over. but he wanted me to do everything. I did all the laundry and the cooking and everything, but I wasn't allowed to do what he didn't want me to do. He could go out for 4 days and disappear, not answer his phone, but God forbid I ignore a text. I know I'm going to pay for that when I get home. So it's little things and big things, and the kind of, I had all of them at once.
Yeah, and you didn't really see this until you were into the relationship a little bit more committed, did you?
Oh, of course. I mean, at first, he did have a little bit of jealousy and stuff at first, but you almost kind of find it charming when it first starts, because you're like, oh, he like likes me so much. You think it's cute that they're a little bit jealous. It's almost flattering. But then when it gets to the point where he's jealous of like your brother hanging out with you, or your dad hanging out with you, or your best friend hanging out with you, but you can go out and be at the clubhouse all night and do whatever you want, but I'm supposed to sit home by myself. That's when it started to get really annoying. But that part didn't start until after we moved into the house.
Okay, so a lot of times people get into these relationships not really understanding the direction that it's going to go.
Right.
So, what are some of these experiences that you had that you can help others, that you can help other women? And, I think there are men that may be the abusers, but I think sometimes there are men that are being at least emotionally abused, which can be devastating in its own right. But what experiences that you have that you think you can share with other women, particularly, that can really help them in these situations?
Well, I think I learned the hard way not to challenge him. And I'll give you an example of that. He used to threaten to kill himself all the time, right? So I got sick of hearing it. I was like, okay, fine, go do it. I'm sick of hearing it. You're not going to control me with that. I was just sick of it. And he literally came out of my bedroom with my gun, my loaded 45, and grabbed me by the neck and put my head right next to him with my gun to his head. That's kind of a moment that it was like, oh, maybe I crossed the line here. It's like sometimes it's not worth challenging them to that level. If you're getting to the point where you're sick of being treated that way, you really need to start trying to think about how you can get out of it instead of poking the bear, so to speak, like I did. It could have ended up very badly. Luckily, once I was locked into that situation, instead of panicking, everything went calm in my body. I just calmed down, started to think completely rationally, started to say everything I needed to say to de-escalate the situation. But it took me getting him to that point to try to de-escalate instead of escalate the situation.
So yours is, if we were to put a 0 to 10 as far as devastating, as far as danger and all of that type of thing, and the degree of the abuse, you put yourself where, around an 8 to a 10?
I would say 6.
Okay.
Only because I've heard so many other horror stories. Like,
Really?
even it's so hard to describe, because even when I had that situation happening, and then another situation where we got into a fight at the clubhouse and he pulled out a knife and started stabbing at my vest to cut it off of me, and we were fighting and he cut me a couple times. I really never felt like I was in danger. I never felt like he was about to kill me. I didn't think he had it in him. And I didn't really think that he wanted to. It wasn't, I don't know. I never felt like my life was in danger when I was with him. It was tantrums, and it was, I don't know. It was never, to me, something that made me feel like he was going to kill me one day. Never, not one time. It was just more
you've heard worse stories.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, his cousin that was abusing his wife at that time was, from what she was telling me at the time, taking her chemo treatments away from her because she was going through cancer treatment, and would, walk by her while she was laying in the bed and hit her feet with hammers, and just really sick, taunting things were being done to her. With my abuser, I kind of knew what to expect. All of his behavior was very explosive. It was very, it was like an outrage or a tantrum. Some of the behaviors that I've heard about with other women, it was very vindictive and conniving and just evil stuff being done to them. Like they would take naked pictures or really embarrassing photos of their spouse and keep them on their camera and create fake accounts with these pictures and show them and be like, go ahead, I'm going to send this out to everybody. Everybody's going to see this. Like stuff like that. He never did stuff like that. It was, you know, not to make it sound any better, but I never felt like my life was in danger. Yeah, he crossed the line a few times. So did I. So it was almost more toe to toe with him and I. And I think maybe that's just me making more excuses for him. I don't know. But hearing some of the other women's stories, it's like terrifying, like the evilness to aspect to it. For him, for me, it was just like tantrums.
So let's talk about those that are experiencing a 2 to 3, because obviously you've been around situations and people that they've really been up at that 6, 7, 8, 9 type of situation. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a huge group out there that are experiencing that abuse at a 2 to 3 level.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and yet they stay in it. They stay in it. And what would be your advice to them? At what point in time, when you're in a relationship, whether you're married or whether you're not married, there's still that commitment, that emotional commitment that you've made. At what point in time does someone go, you know what? This isn't good. This isn't right. And I'm not sure that this is going to change. Here's all of these red flags. At what point in time do they get out?
Well, it depends on the level of the relationship and how much you really feel for them. I would suggest it's, to maybe present it to them, tell them how you're feeling, be honest and open about it, and see how they receive that. And if they would be willing to do some kind of counseling or therapy together or separately to try to fix, because hurt people. This just doesn't happen, overnight for no reason. There's something behind it. So in order to correct that behavior, you do have to find out what's causing it. And 100% of the time, it's not you causing it. It's something that they haven't dealt with, haven't healed from, and need to seek help for. I didn't understand that at the time, and I didn't understand that I would require help as well, and I would have to fix some of my own toxic traits and learn a lot about myself that I didn't want to hear. But that's the only way to heal and grow from something. But if they're not ready to do that or not willing to do that with you, then you kind of, I would think, want to call it quits, because you can't just plateau and flatline and expect to be happy one day if nothing's changing for the good.
Well, and I like what you said. I think that communication is so essential. And as you say, being willing to bring up and be transparent about, hey, you know what, this is what's going on. This is how it's affecting me. What can we do about it? Can we get some help together? I'm going to work on mine. Are you willing to work on yours?
Right.
And if they're not willing to do that, that probably becomes the biggest red flag, doesn't it?
I don't know if it's the biggest red flag, but it should be the biggest final sign that you need to make your exit. Because if you're at a level, 1 to 3, it's probably not physical by then. It's just emotional, and they're saying bad things to you and making you feel bad about yourself. It's most likely not physical, and you're not being sexually assaulted. So there's this weird trauma bond that you kind of form with these guys. And that is probably something that, for me, it didn't happen until after the sexual assault really started. And then after we would have these big fights, we would have these huge sex makeup, sex moments. And it was like a drug. It was something that I craved, after something like that. You want to feel better. So that's the best you feel after you go through this horrible, horrendous thing where you guys just beat the crap out of each other. Now you want to feel good, and it feels amazing, and it's magical, and it's passionate. And it kind of becomes like a drug. You're constantly seeking that part, that high, that connection. It's so deep, and it creates this crazy twisted bond. So if you're at a level 1 to 3, you probably haven't gotten to that severity of the relationship, which is an easier point, I think, to back out and pack your stuff and get out of there.
Well, and when it goes to a 4, to a 5, to a 6, where there starts to be physical abuse to one degree or another.
Mhm.
What are some of the steps you would recommend to, a woman who is experiencing that? What would be the steps that they really need to take to very carefully exit?
If they felt like their abuser was mature enough to have a conversation, I would recommend, starting with that, obviously trying to talk to them about it and see if they were willing to correct that kind of behavior. If that's a no-go and now they're alarmed that you might be fleeing, because most of these guys have insecurities and abandonment issues themselves, which makes them so rageful and quick to react, then you kind of have to start being a little bit, not meticulous, but a little bit smarter about how you're thinking. Because if he's not willing to get the help, if he's not willing to do the work and put into the relationship what you want in the relationship, it's not going to work. You're never going to be happy. So you have to leave unless you want to be miserable. But for me, it was very, I couldn't tell certain people because they would escalate the situation. I couldn't tell certain people because I was embarrassed and ashamed of what I had allowed to happen to me. I couldn't tell certain people because they just really wouldn't believe me. So I had to find a couple people that I could trust enough to rely on if I had to. So if I had to call and use a safe word or a safe phrase, I knew that they would get help to me without arriving themselves and escalating the situation to something it didn't need to be. So those are steps you can probably think about taking at that stage, where you just want to kind of smartly think about how to set things up, like almost like a chessboard, and not trigger your abuser in the meantime.
So let's talk about, because you had a friend that was being abused.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, how does someone, first of all, start to pick up signs that perhaps someone that's close to them is experiencing an abusive relationship, number one. And then number two, how do you connect with them in a way that you do become a solid support for them and a friend, rather than causing them greater embarrassment?
So number one, the first half of your question, to kind of start seeing signs of it, for me personally, started excluding people from my life, friends that I had had for years. If he got into a fight with them or didn't like me being around them, they were slowly but surely pushed away from my life. I didn't hang out with my family as much. I stayed very much to myself. We only did things if it was him and I together, as opposed to me coming alone, because he didn't really like that. So that would be one of the first signs that I would tell people to kind of look for, is them kind of retracting and really not being a part of your life as much as they used to. That was, for me, probably the first thing that I started to do, and not even realize that I was doing it. For the second part, it's really tricky to reach out to somebody if you think that this could be happening to them, because I did have friends that did that. They almost had a friend intervention with me. And I was like, you guys are retarded. Like, this is ridiculous that you would even think that over this one hissy fit. You know what I mean? I was so defensive. I didn't want to hear it. I shut right down. So it's a tricky situation, because if they're not ready to face this, if they're not ready to confront it or accept it, then you kind of coming at them with this information or concern can actually backfire. It could totally just push you out of the picture, because they're not willing to accept that reality. It's like if you're wanting to quit smoking, or you're abusing drugs, or you're an alcoholic, you're not actually going to get clean. You're not actually going to stop that behavior until you really face what it actually is, and that you're ready to get rid of it.
So what you're really saying is there's not much that we can do if we're observing that type of behavior. Really, there's not much we can do until they ultimately make the decision. Can you at least talk to them in a way that, how are you doing, what's going on, and be their friend and hope that they're going to open up to you?
Oh, absolutely. And I found that women actually will open up to vulnerability. So if you have some kind of experience with this, like for me, it's a little bit more comfortable for me to approach the subject with somebody if I suspect that it's going on with them, because I did it too. So they kind of have that connection where Okay, well, it's not so shameful and stupid if she did it because she's smart, she has a business, she has a book, she's an amazing mom, she's white, so they kind of start putting things together and then calming down a little bit. But if it's like your mom and you're thinking that this is happening to your daughter, you're going to be immediately defensive because I didn't come to you to talk about this, you came to me, and now I'm in defense. So you kind of have to wait for them, and as much as you can, let them know that the door is open for them and that you're there to listen and support in whatever way you can. But attacking them is how they would feel attacked if you brought it to their situation like it was brought to mine well before I realized what was going on.
Well, and you talk about your girlfriend who literally had that experience, and the next day she was back.
Yeah.
In the relationship. Did
Right.
she ever get out of it?
No, they're still together. They had another kid.
Okay. So there are times that they don't get out of it. They keep going back. At what point in time would you say to someone, if you had the ability to really communicate, there was total transparency and so forth, at what point in time would you say to someone, it's just time to get out?
Well, I did. I did say that to her. But like I said, if they're not ready to go, they're just not going to. It's like trying to get an alcoholic away from alcohol. If it's available and it's right there, they're gonna pick that drink up if they're not ready to quit.
So how do we help them?
Well, it's really hard because at those in those certain situations, you kind of can't. The only thing you really can do is make sure that they know that if they ever need you, you're there. But also, it hurts me to watch you go through this, so I do have to step back from it a little bit. I don't want to be in danger because of it, and it breaks my heart to watch. And now I know what's going on with you, so I find him disgusting. I find it disgusting that these kids are being exposed to the disgust that he's doing to you, and I just have to step back.
So, with the feedback on your book, have you found that it has actually made a difference for some of these women who have found themselves in these abusive relationships and have somehow given them the inspiration to get out?
He has. And one case in particularly, I'm actually very good friends now with the woman that he was with when my book came out. He had a little tizzy when the book came out and ended up beating the tar out of her. So she, after he got arrested for that, ended up picking up the book, and she contacted me through his sister and everything, and we started speaking, and the book had a very profound impact on her personally because she and I, we shared the abuser. So as she was reading it, um, it was obviously a double-edged sword. She felt, justified and like this, she wasn't alone. She wasn't crazy. This really was who he was. The same person that she tried to ignore the red flags for was the same person that I did. But also it was really traumatizing and heartbreaking, and it made her very upset to read all of it in graphic detail because it's a very detailed book. But she felt like she had to. I kept asking her to stop reading it because she couldn't sleep at night. She was making herself sick. She couldn't eat. I mean, it really stressed her out, and it had that effect on a few people that are close to me. Like it really affected them, which is unfortunate, but that's just, it's how I needed to tell my truth and how I needed to be available for people who were going through something just like this.
And what has this done for you to be able to tell your truth? I think that, one of the biggest challenges for individuals, and particularly women in this case, that they're not able to really speak their truth. They're not really able to talk about what they're experiencing from embarrassment, from fear, whatever that happens to be. What has writing this book done for you? And how could this be applicable to others out there that are listening that may be experiencing an abusive relationship right now?
Well, for me, it was very therapeutic to kind of get it out of me because I was having a difficult time talking about it. I'm kind of the kind of person that I'm not going to present you with my sad stuff unless you ask me a direct question. So even in counseling, I was not really tackling what I needed to. I wasn't going after the traumatic parts of it. I would just go in there all, anxiety riddled and talk about what was happening that day instead of the stuff that was actually bringing me to the counselor. So for me, it was very therapeutic to get out. It was, once I started typing, it was 5 tumultuous weeks of all the emotions. I cried it out. I was hitting my keyboard at certain points because I was so pissed off and hurt and laughing through some of it. It's an emotional roller coaster, but once I tapped into it, it just came flooding right back to me, and I got it all out. And I will say that after I wrote the book, the dreams have kind of slowed down. So the trauma dream, it's like I released something, that I had been building up. So for me, it was therapeutic. I don't have any intention on going back to read the book because it is so graphic and so heavy, especially the chapter about my dog dying while I was at work. That I won't even open that chapter, but I don't know. It's something that I don't have a problem talking about. And if somebody asks me a question, especially if I think it's somebody that's going through something similar or has a loved one going through something similar, I'm a completely open book. I would love to help you in any way I can. And I can identify with it on a very personal level, which some people can't. And I think that that's what the book is really helping people with, is feeling more connected to somebody. Because in my daily life, people would describe me as very strong. I'm outgoing. I'm funny. I'm, very independent. I'm smart enough to run a business and paint cabinets. So they were really shocked, a lot of them, to read this kind of truth. And it also bonded me to a couple people that I didn't realize were going through the exact same thing, almost at the exact same time. And it's emotional, it's heartbreaking, and it's really empowering too at the same time when all these women come up to you and they're like, I was going through that too, and this is what my story is, and I was reading your story bawling my eyes out, and now I want to write a book, and I want to do speeches, and I want to help people. So that to me is what I wrote the book for.
Well, in the last few minutes that we have, you mentioned that obviously you experienced PTSD, you have gone in for counseling and so forth. For those individuals that have at least been able to get out of that relationship, how important do you find seeking some help, getting some counseling to really help deal with all of that trauma that has been embedded within their soul? Do you find that's really important?
Absolutely. I try to get everybody to go get some help for their stuff now, because everybody's got their own level of trauma somewhere, right? You have to do the work, because there's something in you that's allowed this behavior to happen to you as well. People only treat you the way you allow them to treat you. So you have to go dig into your own closet and find out what's going on with you. Is it an insecurity? Is it trauma that happened to you in your childhood? Is it the way you were raised and you were taught that this was normal and that you didn't matter? You really have to get in front of a mirror and kind of face your own issues as well, if you want to see change. Otherwise, you're just going to end up in the same pattern just like they do.
Well, and I think you hit a really important point, is it really does go back to some of those limiting beliefs that we have subconsciously, that we experienced in our childhood, whatever that happens to be, whatever that perception is. Right. And you're right. The only way to ultimately be free is to go through a process of identifying and releasing those. And in your case, it was wonderful to write the book, because that was part of your release.
Oh, it sure was. It definitely was.
Well, Shannon, how do people?
Has a lot to do with self-healing. So
yes.
You have to be open to really finding out who you are. You have to be open to facing your own negative traits and your own toxic behavior, and accepting the responsibility that comes with it and trying to do better and correct it.
Well, I think that's the scariest part, is being willing to accept the responsibility that, hey, guess what? I'm the one that allowed this. And so what is it that I need to really look at and to overcome? So how do people find your book, Shannon?
They can find it www.batteredblessings.com. Amazon has it. Anyway, just Google Shannon Ezzo and it pops up everywhere at this point. But I have a Battered Blessings Facebook page, the website, Amazon, Goodreads, anywhere you can buy a book.
Well, Shannon, thank you so much for being on the show.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's got to be tough to be so transparent and to continually talk about this.
It's kind of exhausting, I won't lie, but completely necessary. So as long as it keeps helping people, I'm gonna keep doing it.
Well, and that becomes the point. I mean, the book certainly was a release for you, but at the same time, as you have mentioned, it's also there to help other people to recognize that maybe they're not the only one going through something, and maybe at some point in time they can make a decision to get out. So I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you having me.
You bet. And folks, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Look forward to having you join us again soon.